The movie begins with Kung-il, a young firefighter, hurrying down a hospital hallway. He receives terrible news about his wife's passing and rushes to the emergency room, finding her lifeless body there. Overwhelmed with sadness and regret, he breaks down in tears. Some days later, we are introduced to Mi-soo, a doctor working at the same hospital, as she goes about her daily duties. Alongside her close friend and colleague, Ha-yoon, they examine a female patient who complains of a headache. However, upon noticing bruises on the patient's hands, they suspect that her husband may be abusing her. Mi-soo attributes the headache to shock and exhaustion, but the husband disagrees, stating that his wife hasn't undergone a thorough medical examination. He leaves the hospital feeling unhappy with the care given. Shortly after, in another place, firefighters respond to an urgent call concerning people fainting suddenly. In a state of panic, the husband reaches out to the fire department for help regarding his wife, who turns out to be the same patient Mi-soo had treated earlier. It becomes apparent that Mi-soo had misdiagnosed the patient, whose condition was actually severe. Her brain blood vessels had burst, leading to serious consequences. Upon discovering this, the husband storms into the hospital, demanding that Mi-soo take accountability. Commander Dong-lee from the fire brigade assigns Kung-il to pacify the enraged husband. However, unable to contain his fury, the husband physically assaults Kung-il by forcefully banging his head against Kung-il's, causing Kung-il pain as he is pushed against a wall. Eventually, the husband realizes the gravity of his actions and apologizes, expressing remorse. As a consequence of this incident, Mi-soo faces repercussions from the hospital management and risks losing her medical license due to the husband's legal actions. Mi-soo and her colleague, Ha-yoon, are suspended from their hospital duties to address the pending court proceedings. While Ha-yoon faces a financial penalty, Mi-soo's situation is more severe. She could potentially lose her doctor title if the patient's husband succeeds in the lawsuit. Some time later, Mi-soo and Ha-yoon consult with a female lawyer to seek advice regarding their legal predicament. The attorney suggests a potential avenue for altering the course of events. When the patient's husband assaults Kung-il, it could be reported to the authorities. Then the lawyer proposes that Mi-soo convinces Kung-il to testify and press charges against the husband for the assault. This strategy aims to exert pressure on the husband, potentially leading him to withdraw his lawsuit. Following the lawyer's advice, Mi-soo sets out to persuade Kung-il to testify against the patient's husband. She begins visiting Kung-il's workplace in a friendly manner. When Kung-il learns of Mi-soo's intentions, he understands the situation. However, he declines Mi-soo's request, believing that the husband's attack on him was driven by grief over his wife's condition in the hospital. After her initial attempt fails, Mi-soo is determined to win Kung-il's affection and make him her boyfriend. Fate brings them together again when Mi-soo encounters heavy traffic due to an accident while on her way. Seeing her idol, Kung-il, on duty from afar, Mi-soo takes to the streets and assists the firefighters to catch Kung-il's attention. Approaching Kung-il, she sweetly tries to engage him, but Kung-il responds with indifference. Confused by Mi-soo's actions, Kung-il questions her motives. Boldly and confidently, she asks Kung-il out on a date. Instead of being pleased by the declaration of love from a beautiful woman, Kung-il is irritated and lightly taps her forehead before walking away. After facing rejection from Kung-il, Mi-soo becomes even more determined to win him over. She resorts to a drastic measure by standing on the edge of a bridge, seemingly contemplating taking her own life by jumping into the river. Calmly, Kung-il steps in, urging Mi-soo to stop her actions. Unfortunately, just as Mi-soo is about to step back, she slips on the bridge's edge, nearly falling into the river. Acting quickly, Kung-il rushes to her rescue and manages to grab her legs, preventing her from falling into the water. Frustrated with Mi-soo's disruptive behavior, Kung-il takes action by reporting her to the police station for causing a disturbance in public. When Mi-soo arrives at the station, she's surprised to discover that she faces a hefty fine of 2 million won. Using her wit, she decides to charm the two policemen on duty by showing them provocative photos of Ha-yoon on her phone. While the officers are distracted by the pictures, Mi-soo notices a community service poster at the station advertising a volunteer program with the firefighting team. Seizing the opportunity, she negotiates with the policeman to exchange her fine for participation in the firefighting program, a proposal to which they agree. Later on, Mi-soo begins participating in the volunteer program with the firefighting team, persuading her friend Ha-yoon to join her. Her aim is clear. She wants to get closer to Kung-il and win his affection. Initially, they undergo training on administering artificial respiration to accident victims. However, their training is interrupted when the fire department commander arrives and assigns them their next task. In summary, a welcome party is arranged for the new members, bringing together firefighters and volunteers for a casual banquet. During the event, Misu openly declares her love for Kung-il, with his friends expressing support, yet Kung-il remains silent. After the party, they wait for a taxi to take them home, but strangely, none pass by. Misu suggests going for a drink instead, but Kung-il declines and hurries home. Eventually, they part ways and head in opposite directions. However, as Kung-il walks, he notices Misu fainting and falling. Rushing to her aid, he picks her up and carries her. Misu wakes up along the way and smiles, explaining that stress caused her to faint. Finally, Kung-il agrees to go for a drink with Misu, fearing she might faint again if he refuses. They spend the night drinking at a bar, but Kung-il gets into a drunken altercation with a foreign man. Misu steps in, resulting in all of them ending up in jail. Misu is temporarily detained at the police station as a consequence. The following day, Kung-il learns from Yongso, his colleague at the fire department, about the events of the previous night involving him. Yongso discloses that Misu was detained at the police station for intervening in a bar fight to defend Kung-il when he was intoxicated. Filled with remorse for getting Misu arrested, Kung-il hurries to the police station to secure her release. Upon arrival, Misu seems familiar with the police officers, having promised to introduce Ayun to them. Kung-il offers to drive Misu home in his car. During the ride, Misu discovers that Kung-il was previously married and that his wife recently passed away. Upon hearing this, she tries to console him by sharing her own experience of losing her mother and coping with it. However, Misu's attempt to comfort Kung-il is jeopardized when her phone rings, and she mistakenly answers the call with the word mama, revealing her deception. Feeling deceived, Kung-il instructs Misu to exit the car. Despite her resistance and refusal to leave, Kung-il eventually pulls Misu out of the car and leaves her on the roadside. Once again, her attempts to win Kung-il's affection end in failure. Once, there was a gas leak at a factory, prompting firefighters to respond. While on duty, Yongsu, one of Kung-il's colleagues, is injured by a powerful blast of gas. Misu steps in to help and stitches Yongsu's wound on the spot since taking him to the hospital isn't feasible. After resolving the gas leak, all the firefighters head home. However, as they prepare to leave, Misu suddenly faints and is accidentally left behind by her group. Unfortunately, none of the firefighters notice her absence until Kung-il realizes that Misu is still at the factory. He promptly returns to retrieve her. Upon returning to the factory, Kung-il finds Misu unconscious and attempts to wake her. However, the refrigerator door unexpectedly shuts, trapping them in a freezing room as the factory resumes operations. Cold air seeps through the ventilation holes, making it unbearable. Eventually, Misu faints again due to the cold. In a desperate attempt to warm her, Kung-il removes his shirt and embraces her. Meanwhile, Kung-il's friends become concerned when they realize that neither Kung-il nor Misu has returned to the fire station. Suspecting that something is wrong, they quickly return to the factory. Fortunately, Kung-il and Misu are found and rushed to the hospital, saving their lives. After the incident, Misu realizes her feelings for Kung-il. Despite initial challenges in their relationship, they gradually develop romantic feelings for each other. They spend more time together, sharing their personal and professional lives. However, their relationship faces difficulties when Misu learns that Kung-il is unable to move on from the memory of his late wife. Misu finds herself facing the upcoming trial for her legal case. Feeling desperate, she revisits her initial plan to persuade Kung-il to testify and sue the patient's husband, viewing it as her only chance to keep her status as a doctor. However, Kung-il remains steadfast in his refusal to testify or press charges against the husband. Instead, he advises Misu to apologize and admit her mistake. Motivated by her own selfishness, Misu rejects Kung-il's suggestion, leading to their eventual breakup. After their breakup, Kung-il reflects on his time with his late wife, looking at her photo and feeling regretful. He regrets the difficult choice he had to make between rescuing injured victims while on duty or taking care of his sick wife at home. His decision to prioritize his duty ultimately led to the tragic loss of his wife, a burden he now carries with deep remorse. The condition of the female patient, initially misdiagnosed by Misu, worsens, reaching a critical stage where medical intervention seems hopeless. Frustrated and desperate, the patient's husband tries to end his own life in the hospital. Mi-soo, present at the time, rushes to his aid and performs CPR, ultimately saving his life. Despite the end of her relationship with Kang-il, Mi-soo continues her volunteer work with the firefighters team. There comes a moment when Mi-soo tries to reconcile with Kang-il, but he remains emotionally distant, burdened by guilt over his late wife. Seeing this, his commander attempts to offer him guidance. On another occasion, Hae-yoon is seen comforting Mi-soo, who is increasingly upset over the end of her relationship with Kang-il. Mi-soo's fainting spells become more frequent, prompting her to seek medical evaluation. Test results reveal that Mi-soo has a mild brain tumor, for which surgery is recommended to remove it. After enduring numerous hardships, Mi-soo finally gathers the courage to apologize and admit her mistake to the husband of her former patient. She meets him in the room, where he was treated after his suicide attempt. The husband comes to realize the value of life anew, and decides to drop the lawsuit against Mi-soo, recognizing the fragility of life and the possibility of his wife's eventual demise. However, he makes it clear that he will never forgive Mi-soo. Overwhelmed with remorse, Mi-soo tearfully apologizes, acknowledging her wrongdoing. In the end, Mi-soo chooses to resign from her position as a doctor at the hospital where she works. She says goodbye to Kang-il, expressing her deep love for him once more in a church before leaving. Meanwhile, Kang-il resumes his duties as a firefighter. While trying to rescue a man trapped under concrete supports after an apartment collapse, memories of his late wife flood his mind. Filled with remorse for his inability to save her, Kang-il urges his comrades to aid the victim as a way to absolve his guilt. Initially hesitant due to the potential danger, Kang-il's persistence eventually persuades his friends to join him in the rescue effort. Together, they succeed in saving the victim. However, their relief is short-lived, as the sound of collapsing buildings is heard, resulting in Kang-il and a colleague becoming trapped beneath the rubble of the apartment. The next day, as Mi-soo is on her way to the hospital for surgery to remove her brain tumor, she hears on the car radio about an apartment collapse. The announcer mentions the victims, including Kang-il's name. Upon hearing this, Mi-soo, stuck in traffic with Hae-yoon, immediately leaves the car and rushes to the side of the collapsed building. At the scene, the rescue team has brought in a crane to clear the debris. However, Kang-il's teammates prevent the crane from being used as it poses a risk to the trapped victims. Luckily, Kang-il and his colleague are found before the crane operation begins. While Kang-il's partner appears unharmed, Kang-il himself is discovered unconscious. He is quickly placed in an ambulance and rushed to the hospital for treatment. In the ambulance, Kang-il dreams of riding a bus with Mi-soo, who attempts to wake him with a leaf. Suddenly, he wakes up from his dream and promptly opens his eyes. Inspired by the dream, he hurriedly leaves the ambulance to find Mi-soo at the hospital where she previously worked. However, upon arrival, Kang-il learns that Mi-soo no longer works there. Disheartened, he leaves the hospital in a shaky state. Luckily, destiny reunites them as Kang-il happens to see Mi-soo running across the street without direction. He calls out to her, and they warmly embrace on the roadside, sharing an intimate moment. The movie ends with a scene in a car where the fire commander cautions new recruits against sleeping on duty. As the hat covering her face is lifted, it is revealed that one of the new recruits is Mi-soo, who seems delighted to be working alongside her boyfriend Kang-il. So the moral of the story is never try to impress your crush by pretending to faint, or you might end up with a brain tumor and a broken heart.